Hello, friends, and welcome to today's Hope reading. It's a little bit of a long chapter today, but definitely another one that I really enjoy, so I hope you do as well. All right. Excuse me. Chapter 15, Pinsor's Story. As they continued to walk on the path through Glandair's land, Alva gave a huge sigh of relief. Glandair was the last great danger in the Karagan Hills, and now they could travel for several days in peace. They had free passage in this land, and as Alva told Hellel, no bandits dared venture into Glandair's land. After some time, Alva touched Hope on the shoulder to quietly gain her attention. "I'm sure you know this," he said, "but I only told Glandair what I did to get us out of that mess." "I know that," she said. "Thank you for saving me. Again. I'm glad you didn't kill him, but why didn't you?" "I didn't have to. My father always said, never kill a man unless you have to. And Glandair is not all bad. He always treated my father with respect." "But he would have killed you, right?" "Probably. He meant what he said. There is still a lot of anger about what happened after the war. I think he would like to overthrow Tyagan, and he might be stupid enough to try it if he could expand his operation." "I don't think it's nice of him to have two wives." "No, that it isn't. That is the height of his hypocrisy. He wants old Lassania back, but breaks one of the fundamental laws of Lassanian society." "So why do you say he's not all bad?" "I don't know. I just think there's good in him somewhere. Somewhere deep down. You usually see good in everything. Do you think I'm wrong?" "No one ever tried to make me his wife by force before, and I can't stop thinking about his poor wives. It's already bad enough for them, and then he tries to add a third wife." "Well, that would definitely be some unfair competition," Alva said. Hope blushed. "Anyway," Alva continued, "I certainly don't think he's good with regard to marriage. I just think there's something good somewhere." "I don't see how a man who has more than one wife and tries to take a third against her will could be good at all." Hope said this with a very stern look that was almost angry. It was the first time Alva had ever seen her look like this, and it was quite charming. He laughed without meaning to. "Why are you laughing at me?" Hope asked. "I'm not," Alva said. "Yes, you are." "Okay," he said. "I'm sorry. It's just that, well, let me explain it this way. My father was one of those who believe the world is round and that it turns." "Yes, of course, that's true," Hope said. "But what does that have to do with anything?" "Well," Alva continued, "he said that the world has two poles, but very few people actually live on them." "I don't think anyone could live on them," Hope said. Hope replied, "They'd be freezing cold. There'd be nothing but ice." Alva laughed again in spite of himself. "You're laughing at me again," Hope said, turning red. "No," said Alva, trying unsuccessfully to straighten out his smile. "I just didn't know that thing about it being freezing at the poles. It's funny how much smarter you are than I am when you're so much younger." "That is not why you were laughing," Hope said. Alva tried not to laugh again, but he failed. "It's a metaphor, Hope," he said. "One pole is good, the other is bad." "Oh, I see. Oh, I see," she said. "Well, you shouldn't laugh at me. I know I say stupid things sometimes. Nero explains that to me later, but it's not my fault. I was never around people until a few weeks ago. And I've been avoiding people since before you were born, Alva said. So ain't we a pair? Anyway, Hope continued, I think Glandair must live very close to one of the poles. Maybe, Alva said, but you live so close to the other one, you might not be at a very good vantage point to say. I might be a better judge since I live somewhere in the middle. I don't think you live in the middle, Hope said. Hopefully there's at least some good in me, Alva said. That's not what I meant, and you know it, Hope said reproachfully. I'm sorry, Alva said, successfully suppressing laughter this time. And thank you. Nera, who had been walking behind them, listening. This time, she laughed. Are you laughing at me too? Hope asked. I'm not taking sides, Nera said. I am laughing at the pair of you. Do you think there could be any good in that man? Hope asked. I don't know, but I've seen a lot worse. Really? When? Hope asked. It's not something I like to talk about, Hope, Nera replied. I'm sorry, Hope said, but she really wondered what this might mean. Anyway, Alva, she continued, I'm sorry for arguing with you when you saved me from worse than death. It's just that. It's just that I was wrong, Alva said with a grin. I don't know, Hope said, throwing up her hands and looking at the sky. Maybe the rotation of the world proves me wrong or something. They all laughed. Well, he's not as bad as he could be, at least, Alva concluded. We'll leave it at that. That night, they made camp on a beautiful stretch of lush grass next to a pool of water. The pool was fed by a stream and had a stream flowing down from it. The water was fresh, cold, and clear. Since they had not had dinner with Glandair, he had sent a man on horseback after them with a barrel of ale and a freshly slaughtered pig. This meant fresh ham and ale for dinner and bacon for breakfast. It was a well-earned feast after all they had come through. Because of their safe passage in the land, they did not have to be worried about being silent. It was a night of singing, merrymaking, talking, and laughing. Hope taught Prior a song she knew in the common tongue, and they sang a duet. It was the most beautiful duet anyone there had ever heard. Hope's voice was, of course, unparalleled, but if there was any voice in the kingdom that could justly accompany it, it was Prior's. The song was about a farmer, his family, and his harvest. Hope chose it because Alva was always praising farmers. It was a simple, sweet song, and by the end all were in joyous tears. Of course, as Pensor was fond of observing, Hope could bring a man to tears by singing the alphabet. After the song, Keel addressed Alva. My lord, he said, bowing low and grinning. Were you really in the trouble we thought you were in? You hardly seemed out of breath when it was all over. Please call me Alva, he responded, somewhat embarrassed. But I did give him a bit of a kick in the shin. Alva looked at Prior when he said this. It was a way of saying he gave him a sneaky surprise. I made him think his advantage was greater than it was. My father always said that a man gets sloppy when he's overconfident. So it proved, even with a great warrior like Glandair. Bonson scoffed at this description of Glandair, but no one paid attention to him. Keel grinned again. This time quite mischievously. You know, Lady Hope, he said teasingly, now you have to marry Alva. At this comment, Hope blushed and fidgeted uncomfortably. Bonson jerked up his head and stared at her and then at Alva. But Alva laughed heartily. Ha 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 ha! Yeah, just what every beautiful young girl wants. A sour, cynical, worn-out old man. When he said this, Hope blushed and glowed, giving her countenance a charming shade of pink. Nera lowered her head and smiled. The irony of Alva's joke was clear to everyone but Alva himself. This was too much for Lord Bonson. "Ha!" he said very loudly. "Well, now at least one mystery is solved. I've been wondering for many days how a wandering vagrant could be so skillful at slaughtering men. Now it all makes sense. He is the son of Al-Salah the Butcher." Alva mastered himself because he was still under Hellel's orders. "Bonson," he said, "you may call me anything you wish. But please do not speak about my father that way again. When a man is a butcher, I call him a butcher," Bonson said challengingly. "As long as we're on this journey, Hellel's orders stand," Alva replied. "But when this journey is done, I'm going to cut off your pretty head and throw it in a pig's slop trough. We'll see how much deference they show to your lordship." "I'll be waiting," Bonson said haughtily. Hellel was about to intervene, but Hope spoke first. "Please don't kill him, Alva," she said with deep emotion in her voice. "Do you love him?" Alva asked. No, no. But please don't kill him." At this statement, Bonson's countenance fell. "No need to kill him," Alva said. "I think you just did." Bonson's hand automatically reached toward his sword. He seriously considered drawing his sword and attacking Alva. Alva's hand did not move, but his eyes gave Bonson a look that said, "Go ahead." Out of respect for Hellel, Bonson mastered himself. Instead of drawing his sword, he stormed out into the darkness. Hope had meant to help, not hurt him, but she had unwittingly crushed his spirit. How thoroughly she had crushed him she could not have known. Not only had she removed any hope that he had that she might love him, but she clearly believed that Alva could kill him at will, and his life could only be saved by her intervention. "That wasn't a nice thing to say, Alva," Hope said reproachfully after Bonson had left. "Oh, it wasn't it?" Alva said in a tone that was not kind. Hope looked wounded. Tears were beginning to form in her eyes when Alva spoke to her more gently. "I'm sorry, Hope. You're right, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I said to him, and I'm a lot sorrier for what I said to you." "I forgive you," she said gently. "I was angry because of what he called my father," Alva explained. "But my father always said, kill a man if you need to protect yourself or others. Never kill a man for revenge. I shouldn't have threatened to kill him in revenge, and I shouldn't have taken revenge with words either. I was wrong." "I'm not angry with you, Alva," said Hope. "I just don't like to see Lord Bonson hurt. But what he said was very wrong, and I understand why it made you angry. Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What happened with your father? I've read history books about the war, but they are vague. They just indicate that Lassania was losing the war, and Hurin graciously offered them a peace deal. What really happened?" Perhaps the best man to answer that question is Pensor. He was there for most of it. "Would you tell me, Pensor?" Hope asked. "If it's all right with Lord Hellel," said Pensor. "The true story ain't exactly flattering for Hurin or New Lassania." "I'm a historian," Hellel replied. "Facts concern me more than prejudice." I was only 14 when the war ended, too young to have fought. I am very interested in your account. I will dispute any point that I wish. Fair enough, Pencil replied, and thus he began his tale. The story starts a long time before the war. Ancient Laconia was not ruled by a king, but by many different tribes living in scattered villages with their own chieftains. These chieftains had occasional conflicts, but as I understand it, they lived in relative peace. As time would have it, the valley was threatened by a powerful force from beyond the mountains, and they wanted to conquer it. The tribes were not strong enough to repel them, but Philon's ancestor, Divon the Great, united the tribes. He was a philosopher and a powerful rhetorician. He'd written some powerful works on ethics and values, and he was able to make all the chieftains believe in them, so much so that they made him their king. Divon had one problem, though. He didn't know anything about war. His tribe had lived in peace for quite a long time. On the outer rim of the valley, there was a chieftain named Mancher. Being close to the pass, his tribe had to do quite a bit of fighting. When Mancher listened to Divon speak, he believed in him. He believed in his ethics. He believed that a united kingdom could be a place of great light. Because of this, he swore allegiance to Divon and swore to defend him from all attackers. Under Mancher's military leadership, the united tribes were able to drive out the invaders, and thus began the kingdom of Old Laconia, or the Light Kingdom. To be clear that he was giving up his own tribal rule in favor of Divon's kingship, Mancher changed his name to Al-Salah, which means the king's own. He also created a new name for his family dynasty, Danae, meaning shield. Put together, the name means the king's own shield. It became a tradition that every firstborn son in the Danae lineage would receive his father's name and assume responsibility for protecting Divon's line of kings. While Divon's heirs continued to study and write books on philosophy, law, and statesmanship, the Danaes dedicated themselves to refine the art of warfare. This was to ensure that the Light Kingdom would always be protected. Alva's ancestors have written lots of works on various aspects of war, and Alva's father wrote quite a few himself. Many thought him to be the greatest Danae since Al-Salah the First. Part of Laconian law was that we were a kingdom, not an empire. Imperialism was strictly forbidden. The Danaes would only defend. Well, for hundreds of season changes, our neighbors to the west, the Hurons, began to expand a great empire farther west, but they did not dare attack Laconia. The Danaes were always prepared for such an attack, knowing that it would come someday, and they were determined that such an attack would fail. Well, under Diaphon the Conqueror, the Hurons finally believed they were strong enough to conquer Laconia. This brings us to the real story. The Danaes always kept a division of soldiers on guard in a fort built on a platform called the Eye. It was situated on the Huron side of the Camden Pass. It got its name because it's shaped a little like an eye, and because they always watched for possible invasion from the west. Finally, one day, a Huron army began to muster below. Al-Salah the 26th had long expected this. They sent him a carrier falcon with the news, and his army was well prepared. I was 15 when the war started and joined up as soon as I turned 16. Al-Salah would not let people join until they were full adults by the Laconian reckoning. Every young man in the kingdom rushed to fight for him as soon as they could. Now, I'll try not to bore you with too much detail, but I'll summarize what happened as best as I can. Diaphon the Conqueror was a military genius, and the initial force with which he attacked was 20 times the size of ours. He knew his losses would be high, but he had made calculations. He figured it would take his force about one season change to breach the entrance of the Camden Pass. Once this was done, he thought the war would be practically over. What he didn't figure on was Al-Salah-Dineh. The battle for the Camden Pass happened in 3 phases, and this is very important to understand. Nothing major ever happened that Al-Salah did not predict in advance. He never thought the pass could hold forever, and he made plans accordingly. He always fell back rather than suffer unreasonable losses, and he always had plans to lead the Hurons in and take them out. What he told us was the same thing he told the king. The last stand would be at Grenvere, if the Hurons made it that far, with everything he had in store for them. They might make it as far as the walls of the capital someday, but, and he had promised this to Philon III, they would never penetrate them. Until then, we would never hold a point longer than was useful. We would fool them into thinking they were making progress, and then destroy their latest front line. As Pincer explained this last point, all the company was reminded of Alva's duel with Glandair, a microcosm of his father's war methods. Like I said, Prior continued, Diaphon thought he'd breach the entrance in 1 season change, but it took 3, with heavier losses than he could have imagined. The battle for the entrance was the first phase. The Hurons must have lost at least 10 men for our every one. But there was an especially great loss for Al-Salah during that phase. He had 2 sons, Al-Salah the 27th, his eldest, and Manan, his second. Manan commanded a battalion of catapults and giant crossbows on one of the ridges. He took an arrow in one of the Huron onslaughts about a season change after the war began. Thus, Al-Salah lost his second son in the first phase. It was soon after that I joined. I saw most of the rest firsthand. When the Hurons thought they had won enough ground to take the pass, they prepared for a huge onslaught. But Al-Salah pulled us back the night before to take our next stand at the center pass. We didn't make it too hard for them to make it up to the center pass, because Al-Salah wanted them to think we'd lost heart when they broke through the entrance. But he had a surprise in store for them. He'd been making preparations since before their first attack. If you know the center pass, then you know there are 2 gigantic rocks on either side with vertical sides. Most believed those rocks couldn't be climbed, but Al-Salah believed they could. He set the best climbers in the kingdom to trying. 4 men fell to their death in the process, but eventually both sides were conquered by climbers. Once up, they drove in pegs so that rope ladders could be attached for more men to follow. As Alva mentioned once, his father had learned every discipline he thought he might find useful. Mathematics, architecture, physical science, etc. He devised a system of ropes and pulleys by which big rocks that had been brought up in horse carts were hauled to the top of both sides. This work was carried out while the battle raged below. When the Hurons charged the center pass, we fell back. They thought we were giving in easily until the rocks started falling on their heads. The rocks were rolled off at the right angle to roll down the pass on the western side and crush more Huron troops. So many soldiers were crammed in that day, they had very little way of escape. This killed many of their soldiers and also served to block the pass for months. While the Hurons cleared the rocks, Al-Salah prepared another surprise. There was not time to lug up many more rocks, but Al-Salah had seen to it that great cauldrons were hung up on both sides. They were at the top and out of view. When the Hurons finally cleared the pass, they prepared for another charge. They started with fewer men to make sure no more rocks would fall. We put up a good fight for a while and held their onslaught back. They thought we were making our stand now and prepared a powerful charge to knock us back. But the night before, our men had boiled the cauldrons full of Lacinian burning oil. We fell back when their powerful charge came, and our men poured the hot oil down on them. As they scampered back, the hot oil ran down the pass at their feet. Then a man on top threw down a torch, and the oil ignited, killing many more Hurons. You need to understand, Al-Salah was never cruel to prisoners, but his tactics in battle did exactly what they were designed to do: strike terror into the hearts of the enemy. The Huron soldiers began to get skittish about attacking, never knowing what Al-Salah would do next, but their fear of Diaphon's wrath kept them coming. By this time, Diaphon had to bring in reserves from the outskirts of his empire. That was weakening his hold on those outer regions. Because of the success of Al-Salah's methods, the Hurons began calling him the Butcher. We held the center pass as long as Al-Salah thought convenient, and fell back before he felt holding it any longer would be a waste. Again, the Hurons thought they had finally succeeded. With the center pass taken, it was all downhill. The last phase in the battle for the Camden Pass happened on the slopes of the Lacinian side. Our troops surrounded the plain at the bottom in a semicircle, but we let many Hurons come out of the pass and onto the plain. What they did not know was that Al-Salah had this plain soaked with burning oil. Several flaming arrows were shot, and the plain full of Hurons went up in flames. When the flames finally burned out, more Hurons rushed to the plains, but they were met by the Lacinian cavalry for the very first time. A series of our cavalry charges had them retreating back up the pass, where we held them stuck, trying to figure out how to bring a successful onslaught to the plains. Al-Salah Dineh the 27th was killed in the first cavalry charge. He led his men fearlessly and fiercely from the front. The sight of him riding down Hurons with his men at his back is one I'll never forget. He was the spitting image of his father. Alva here got a lot more of his mother's looks. That brings me to an important point I haven't covered yet. Alva's mother, Dana, was a Lacinian lady. She was 15 season changes younger than her husband. He had spent his time studying war and had never been interested in marriage till he met her. Right before the second phase began, she insisted on coming to the front and saying goodbye to her husband and firstborn son. She knew she might lose them, as she had already lost Manon. She bravely spent a couple of days there, knowing that the Hurons were preparing for an attack. Al-Salah was 60 then, and she was 45. Now, most would consider her and her husband far too old for what happened, but when she returned, she was with child. I never heard of any other woman having a child that old, but she kept her youth well, and Al-Salah didn't exactly have one foot in the grave. Anyway, after the third phase, we were at a stalemate. The Hurons were in the pass, ready to come out, but we were ready for them. Diaphon had lots more men to waste on us, and Al-Salah had many more surprises in store for them as they would try to make their way to Grenvere. He would lead them out near a lake so they would think they had water, then cut off the source and poison the lake. Many schemes like this he had planned. Wave after wave of Hurons was going to die. Weren't some of his methods a little cruel? Hope asked. Well, Pensor replied, it was war. Nobody invited the Hurons, and they were free to go home if they didn't want to die. Al-Salah was outnumbered, and he had sworn to defend his king and country. Like I said, he promised Philon they would never take Grenvere, and nothing happened different than he said it would. Nevertheless, I suppose Philon got nervous when the pass was lost. A Huron delegation bearing a white flag came through one day, wanting to meet with Philon. Al-Salah let them through. He and Philon had been good friends all their lives. He trusted his friend to tell the Hurons that they were free to give up the war and go home whenever they wanted. Diaphon had been getting frustrated. He was losing many men, and his hold on his outer empire was getting very weak because of all the soldiers he'd been pulling in as reinforcements. He offered Philon a deal. Hostilities would cease if Philon would surrender, and there would be no punishment on Laconia. Philon would have to abdicate as king, but the Laconian nobility would keep their rank, and Philon would be the first lord in the new kingdom. He could also keep his palace in Grenvir, as the Hurons would build their own new capital. There was one proviso, however. Alcala Dene was hated and feared. The Hurons would not tolerate him as a lord in the new kingdom. For the deal to go through, he had to be stripped of his title, his ancestral lands would be taken away, and given to Huron lords. To make a long story short, Philon took the deal and stabbed his friend in the back. He kept his palace, while Alcala, who had already given 2 sons for Philon, was sent away with nothing. Dana was heartbroken. She didn't care about their estate, but after losing her 2 sons, it was the last blow to see her husband treated that way. She was not a young woman, and she had the added difficulty of being with child. She used her last strength to hold on until she had given birth to 1 more son. Then she could hold on no more, and Alcala lost his wife. He had given everything for his king and had been betrayed. With his elder sons dead, the new boy would normally have been the next Alcala. But his father determined the boy would not give his heart to a king. He named him Alva, his own. And he raised his son in the hills, while Philon sat on his palace cushion, allowing the Hurons to abuse his former friend and call him a butcher. The Hurons call that deal the Great Peace, but it was really a great betrayal. Philon sold out his friend to save his own skin. That's the end of my story. I have studied this myself, Hellel said, and all of Pensor's facts are true. But I came to know Philon III very well, and I think I should say a word in his behalf. It is true that Alcala said the war could have been won, and he may have been right, but more was at stake than just that. Every young man in the kingdom could not wait to fight for Alcala, but many men were being spent. Diaphon would not have given up until he had no men left. Philon was hearing requests daily from distraught parents who did not want to see their sons die. They begged him to stop the war somehow. By the time the Hurons would be defeated, if this were, in fact, possible, there would have been almost no Laconian men left to carry on the kingdom. The pact was an expediency, yes, but it was well known that Huron was not a cruel master to conquered kingdoms. Philon had to either sacrifice 1 man or see thousands upon thousands of young men die. He chose the latter, but it haunted him until his dying day. He knew that Alcala had not been treated fairly, but the Hurons would not make the deal otherwise. I'm sure he was crying on his silk pillow every night, Alva interjected. While his own wife and children were safe in their palace, meanwhile my father's wife and sons were dead, and he was living as a poor man in the hills. It hurt Philon more than you'll ever know, Alva, Hellel said. My father always said that if a man acts honorably, he will have no reason for remorse. If your father had sworn loyalty to his king, wasn't he bound to do what his king thought best for the kingdom? Nera asked. Yes, Lady Nera, Alva replied, turning to her, and he honored his oath. If you were listening to Glandair today, you would know that there were some lords who would not cross over and join the betrayal. They wanted my father to seize the throne for himself and continue the war. This he could have done easily because he had the loyalty of the army. But he would not see the Light Kingdom become a military dictatorship. He would not break his oath even when his king betrayed him. Even though Philon hurt him more deeply than any other man had hurt another before, he maintained his loyalty to the end. And he told me that his only command for me after his death was that I never seek revenge for what happened. Philon hung my father out to dry, but my father maintained his honor to the end. It wasn't that simple, Alva, Hillel said. Philon loved his people. He could not bear to keep sending them to their deaths when he had the power to stop the bloodshed. He didn't do it to save his skin. He did it to save his people. Alva was silent for a moment. Hillel certainly presented an angle he had never considered. It had always seemed simple before, but this did seem to complicate it, from Philon's perspective at least. But his father had done his duty, and Philon had never instructed him otherwise. Hillel was wrong. It was simple. No, Alva said at last. You are a great philosopher and rhetorician, my lord Hillel, but you speak like a Huron. I can't blame you for that. You are a Huron, and the best one I've ever met. But I'm a Lacinian. So was my father, and so was Philon III. Old Lacinia was the light kingdom. Divon the Great taught us that there is light and darkness, right and wrong, and Philon was wrong. If we stop bloodshed by stabbing our friends in the back, what kind of kingdom are we preserving? More was at stake than just winning a war. Old Lacinia was founded on ethics and values that were worth preserving, values like truth and integrity. Accepting Diaphon's peace offer was giving him the victory. Everyone knew that. By giving him the victory, Lacinia told the world that our principles were not worth fighting for, and that military strength makes one right. Diaphon believed he could take what he wanted because he had the most power and the most men. My father did not believe that was true, but by accepting the peace, Philon said that it was. I understand your perspective, Alva, but you've never been responsible for the lives of thousands of men. My father was. Yes, but perhaps things are simpler for a soldier than a king. Your father was always sure of the right course. Philon felt he had a no-win situation. Either choice seemed wrong to him, so he took the one that seemed less wrong. If he really felt that way, Alva replied, if he really felt like he should abdicate to the Hurons, he could have maintained his integrity. All he had to do was forfeit his own palace and title, pack up his wife and sons, and join my father in the hills. If it were really about saving lives and not his own interests, he could have proved it by doing that. Then no one could call him a betrayer. Instead, he kept his privilege and let my father take the humiliation alone. That makes the story he told you look like lies and hypocrisy. Hillel thought for a moment. Perhaps he should have done what you say. But not everyone has your father's courage, Alva, and not everyone has yours. Perhaps he was afraid to give that life to his wife and children. But he did love your father, and he was sorry for what happened. He had as much love for his friend as any other coward and backstabber, said Alva, and that is the simple truth of the matter. Alva, said Hillel gently, Philon III became a very good friend to me. I would like to make an agreement with you. I will swear to never let a man abuse your father in my presence if you swear never to abuse my friend again. Alva was silent for a few minutes. Finally, he answered. I respect you very much, Lord Hillel, but I can't promise that just now. I do promise that I will never again abuse Philon III in your presence. That will have to do, Hillel said graciously. I, however, do swear to never let a man abuse your father in my presence. I respect your father very much, Alva. I always have, and I know that what happened to him was not right. I disagree with the imperialism of my people, and I know that he was only doing his duty in defending his home. He was no butcher. He was a great warrior and a great man, and he raised a great son. You have all my honor and respect. Thank you, my friend, Alva replied. He put down his head and began to weep. Alva had not wept since he was a small child, but here he sat, weeping silently, weeping for his father and all he lost so unjustly, weeping for his mother and brothers whom he had never known. He felt no shame. He did not get up and leave the group. He just sat before the fire and let himself weep. Pensor came and sat on his left side, putting his arm around his friend's shoulders, and wept with him. Hope came and sat on his right. She took his hand, and she wept too. She felt Alva's pain and wept as though it were her own. Some distance away in the dark, the young Lord Bonson was lying on his face, weeping as well. After a good deal of time, the weepers arose, dried their eyes, and went to bed. It had been a day of much joy and sorrow, and some lives had changed forever.